Visa guidance, I'm an assistant professor of psychiatry with Carilion School of Medicine, Virginia Tech University. There are two types of visas, J1 and H1 visa. These are the two main types of visa which you get when you successfully receive a residency offer. J1 visa is the first of and most common these days. Hardly any program these days are offering H1. There are still some, but not many. J1 is basically an exchange visitor visa. It's in layman terms, it's also known as student visa. A lot of time people would be doing paid and unpaid research on it. People would be studying in university on it, but uh, US Department of State has allowed physicians from all over the world to work on it. Uh, DOS or Department of State has designated ECFMG to sponsor this visa. So State Department is not directly involved in a way, so they have designated ECFMG. It's important that it's a non-immigrant visa, so the intent is non-immigrant, and it has a 2-year home requirement, which means that one if you have finished when once you have finished your training or whatever your job on J1 visa, then the rule is that you return to your home country at least for 2 years, and then you can reapply a US visa. Uh, okay, so general eligibility and requirements. To apply for a J1 visa, you need to have your standard ECFMG certification. You need to have a job contract for a position in an approved GME training program. Then you need statement of need, about which our esteemed panelist was discussing. It's from Ministry of Health. And of course, you have to get it from a country of your most recent legal permanent residence. Of course, for most of us, it's Pakistan. Process. So the process starts once on the match day, you get to know where you get matched, then you will start getting loads and loads of email from your residency program. So they designate a person which they usually call as TPL, Training Program Liaison. So that person, usually a female, is in direct contact with ECFMG. And together they would provide you with the documentation and step-by-step guidance on how to apply for it. It would involve Savis. You have to go register yourself on Savis, pay some fees, and then after that, and after providing all the necessary documentation, ECFMG would issue you a DS 2019 form. It is important that you need to have a physical copy of that form when you appear for the visa interview. So a lot of time people ask that how early can we get the visa appointment. Now, in order to get a J1 visa appointment, you would need to have your service ID. And once you have that service ID, you can schedule an appointment by filling the DS-160 form and going to ustraveldocs.com/pk. And when at ustraveldocs.com/pk, you would mention the J1 visa, they would ask for service ID. So you need to be mindful about that. And then, of course, you have to pay the fee at an Allied Bank, any Allied Bank branch in Pakistan. And then next day, you would be able to schedule the appointment. Due to COVID and due to the closure of Afghanistan embassy in Kabul, there has been long delays for interviews. Usually, you first get a day out for 6 months or a year, and then you apply for emergency appointment. But I think Dr. Fateh Shahzad has been very gracious, and he has been in contact with the U.S. Embassy in Islamabad and Karachi, and he would, I think, reconfirm that they have opened at least 250 to 300 spots for the J1 and H1B eligible physicians. So once you are able to, once you fill your DS-160 and you go to US Travel Docs and mention your visa category, you should be able to just get an appointment within a week or so. So there are only two places in Pakistan, uh, Islamabad and Karachi. On the day of interview, always arrive early. In Islamabad, there's an additional hassle of going to a shuttle, paying fees. You need to be mindful about that. It can take a lot of time. So at least arrive an hour early before your appointment or even more. Dressing, you should be formally dressed. I would encourage guys to be wearing dress pant and shirt and a tie. If not the coat, you can wear a coat. I would also encourage the females to be dressed appropriately. I would discourage from wearing heavy jewelry to females, and I would discourage guys not to uh, give them rough looks, not to have a rough beard and stuff like that. So it's just imagine that it's even more important than your residency interview. Okay. The documents which you need to bring to the day of interview is, of course, the original DS 2019 form, which your residency TPL would have mailed you. Now, a lot of time people ask that sometimes it's delayed. So the best thing is you can ask your residency program to mail it you via UPS. A lot of time they are state universities, they would use USPS and it can get delayed. You can ask them that you are willing to pay for the UPS fee if that's the case, so that you can get it sooner with a tracking number. You need to have your contract letter. Just a printout is fine. You don't need to have the original. You need to have a bank statement. It may sound silly, but at times they can ask your ERA CV, your US family results. Yeah, you would be surprised that even after you have gotten the residency, they can still ask for ACFMD certification, US family results. If you are married and your dependent are applying for J2 visa, either your wife, your husband, or your kids, then you need to have the English version of your marriage certificate and birth certificate of kids. J1 visa is stamped for 1 year, irrespective of how long your residency is. It is only stamped for 1 year. During that year, you can enter in US as many times as you possible, as many time as you want. After that 1 year, if you leave US, you need to get it restamped. It not necessarily you need to get it stamped from Pakistan. You can get it stamped from anywhere. Canada, Mexico are other options. Some people avoid going to Pakistan for obvious reasons. There's a higher risk of administrative processing, especially over the past couple of years, due to some cold relationship between our governments. So, unfortunately, there are people who get stuck in administrative processing, and we'll be talking more about it. Uh, so what they would do is when you go to the interview, if they approve your visa, they will uh, ask you to submit your passport, and then they would sign your DS 2019 form. It is very important that the visa officer sign your DS 2019 because you would have to present it along with your passport at the immigration. Okay, and then once you arrive in US, then you need to go to the I-94 website and print out your I-94, and we'll talk more about why it's necessary. The other form of visa is H-1B visa. It's called a specialty occupation visa. It is sponsored by your employer. Again, like J1, it's stamped for 1 year. Same rule applies for the restamping. It does not have a 2 year home requirement. It's an easier road to immigration requirement. So in addition to all the other requirements for the J1, you need to have ECFMG and successful passing of your step three. Keep in mind, you cannot get an H1B visa physicians unless you have cleared step three. And I think recently at our YPC webinar, YPC residency guidance seminar in Apna Spring meeting, Dr. Fateh clearly mentioned that step three is mandatory for H1B visa. Again, your employer has to apply for actual or prevailing wages, and of another requirement is you need to have an unrestricted state license before you can get H1B visa. Process is that your employer would apply for a labor condition application and submit it to the Office of Foreign Labor Certification for approval. Then you would fill out Form I-29, that's a petition for non-immigrant worker. USCIS takes some time to process it. If you apply for premium processing, it gets within 2 weeks. I got it in 7 days. Most of the time, like 99% of the time, the candidate, the app, would have to pay for the premium processing. So this is again very important that you should have $2,500 for that. Otherwise, the normal processing time can take 4 to 6 weeks. And again, once you have these things, again, you have to go fill DS-160. You have to go to US Travel Docs uh, to fill out that. Administrative processing. I labeled it as red because it is sort of a black hole. Uh, what it is that once you appear in the interview, the visa officer can place your case application into administrative processing, citing the reason that they require more information and they need to do background check in order to clear your visa. Now, there are mainly two kinds of it. One is that usually it's the State Department from the back end. Whenever you submit your application, they decide from the get-go that they are going to place your application on administrative processing for various reasons. It could be someone like me whose name is Ahmed Rehan Khan and it hits their database, their terrorist watch list. And then it could be, then the other thing is that the visa officer doesn't get satisfied with your answers during the interview and he wants to make sure that everything is in order, then he would put your uh, case under processing. Usually, what they do is they would sign your DS 2019 in case of J1 and return it to you and keep your passport. It can take anywhere from 2 days to 2 months, 3 months, 6 months. Some people are stuck for years. Usually, for physicians, especially who are starting residency, they try to resolve it within a month or two. But I have seen people getting stuck for years and years. Uh, Now, what you can do if you get stuck in administrative processing is there are a few steps you can do. First of all, keep this thing in your mind that there's nothing substantial that anyone can do. What you can do is you can reach out to the senator and congressional leadership, congressmen, congresswomen of the state where you get your residency. They would write letters to request assistance with that to State Department. You can ask directly your program director and coordinator to send them emails and ask them to expedite your process. Of course, Apna advocacy team has done a fabulous work in that. Dr. Fatih Shahzad has been very gracious. They also reach out. Dr. Shahzad Iqbal is a liaison between Apna and State Department. He always reaches out. So that's the only thing basically you can do. Worst come worst, if it gets delayed for more than 2 months, there's a legal option that you can go for, which is known as writ of mandamus. Uh, what it means is that a lawyer in US can sue State Department, including Secretary of State and all the ambassadors in Pakistan and stuff like that. It requires at least $5,000-10,000, and not every lawyer does it. You need to find a good lawyer, preferably in DC. So what they do is that they sue State Department, and then in that case, State Department has to respond within 60 calendar days. Most of the time, they resolve your case. Other, if they don't want to resolve it, then they have to go in front of a judge in DC and fight it, which they hardly do because they don't have any solid reason. So that's the only legal thing which you can actually do. Onboarding, it is important. A lot of people don't know that for J1, you can enter, even if you get your visa in May, you cannot enter 30 days before starting your residency. Usually, when you start your orientation, it's like 7, 8 days before your residency. So you could practically enter around 23rd May. For H1B, it's just 10 days. So you cannot enter before 10 days starting your orientation. I would recommend reach as early as possible because you have to do a lot of stuff before you start. Once you go through immigration and the immigration officer, he or she stamps your passport, then go right after that, go to I-94 website and check that they have given you the appropriate entry. Apartment, very important thing. Try to find it as close as to your hospital, unless your hospital lies in a location that is difficult to live because of the safety concerns. I would recommend you to rent an apartment very close, preferably a walking distance. In that way, you would save some money for the car. You can go to online, you can go to apartments.com. Sometimes it's difficult to log in there from Pakistan, so you have to use a VPN. There are other websites, Zillow, Trulia. Try to get a cheap apartment but livable. Don't go into shady places where people are using drugs. You can get yourself into trouble. Usually, it requires some deposit and apartment insurance, which you can get easily for $100 a year from Geico or Progressive and stuff like that. A lot of time they would check your credit history, and because most of us don't have any credit history when we enter US, so they might ask you for a co-signer. So, and that person has to be a US citizen or at least has a green card. So you should, if you are renting an apartment, like a very luxurious apartment at a posh location, they might ask you these things. At times they would not. And then car. Uh, don't go for Mercedes, BMWs, and stuff like that. Not because you cannot, I mean, people are rich, they can afford it, but it requires a lot of documentation. So you have to remember that your J1 and H1B visas are stamped for 1 year. And once you get a car, either you lease or you finance it for 3, 5 years. So they would give you trouble that how can we give you, how, because you are legally only allowed to stay here for a year. So a lot of time residency program coordinators would write supporting letters stating that their whole duration of residency is this, this, and this. Again, the credit score, they would check your credit score, which would usually turn out to be 0, and you might need a co-signer. There are different options, new versus pre-owned. I would recommend new. Lease versus finance, I would recommend leasing it. You have to be mindful. There has been a car chip shortage in US for the past couple of years, so situation is pretty dire right now. Miscellaneous, you gotta go to Social Security office to get that. You need to be in US for 10 days before you apply it. You have to apply for driver's license. Usually there's a written test and a driving test, practical test. Now, if you have your international driver's license from Pakistan, most of the states would exempt your uh, learner's permit requirement. So they would provide you with a temporary license, which you can use for driving, and then you just undergo the written and uh, practical test and you get the license. But if you don't have international license, then you have to first get the permit and have to follow all the process for that. So it is very important, very, very important to have international driving license from Pakistan in English. The last thing, again, it depends upon, some people are frugal, some people are not. In my humble opinion, you need at least $5,000 to $10,000 in order to set. So it would include deposit for your apartment, first month rent, money for car, money for some of the basic furniture, grocery, and stuff like that. And right now, people just feel that Pakistan is expensive. There is a huge inflation in US. Gasoline, or what we call in Pakistan as petrol, is like $4.5 per gallon, and diesel is like 5.1. So things are pretty expensive. So on a safe side, you should have $5,000 to $10,000. And then, of course, you can ask people to lend you if you don't have yourself, and of course, you can then pay them back.